There's a powerful truth that most people discover too late in life. The people closest to you can sometimes be the ones who hold you back the most. Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, understood something profound about human relationships that we often miss. He knew that setting boundaries isn't about being cold or distant. It's about protecting the integrity of your own psyche, your own becoming. Today, we're going to explore 7 behaviors that Jung's psychology teaches us we must never tolerate from anyone, not even those we love most. These aren't arbitrary rules. They're psychological principles rooted in the architecture of the human mind itself. By the end of this video, you'll understand why tolerating these behaviors doesn't make you kind or loving. It makes you complicit in your own psychological imprisonment. Jung introduced the concept of the shadow, that dark repository of everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves. The qualities we despise, the impulses we suppress, the aspects of our personality we'd rather pretend don't exist. These don't disappear. They accumulate in the unconscious, and here's where it gets dangerous for your relationships. When people haven't done the work of integrating their shadow, they project it outward. They see in you what they cannot bear to see in themselves. The jealous person accuses you of envy. The dishonest person questions your integrity. The controlling parent calls you selfish when you assert independence. This is not mere hypocrisy. It's a psychological defense mechanism that Jung called projection, and it's incredibly destructive when you tolerate it. Why? Because when you accept someone else's projection, you begin to carry their psychological burden. You start to question yourself. Am I really that selfish? Am I really that manipulative? You internalize their disowned shadow material, and your own psyche becomes contaminated with content that isn't even yours. Jung was clear about this. The process of individuation, of becoming who you truly are, requires that you differentiate what is yours from what belongs to others. When a family member constantly projects their shadow onto you, calling you angry when they're seething with rage, calling you weak when they're terrified of their own vulnerability, you must name it. You must refuse to be the screen upon which they project their inner cinema. This doesn't mean attacking them or psychoanalyzing them publicly. It means calmly refusing to accept their characterization. "That's not my experience of myself," is a complete sentence. "I don't recognize myself in what you're saying" is sufficient. You don't need to defend, explain, or justify. You simply refuse to let their unconscious material become your conscious problem. The cost of tolerating projection is nothing less than the loss of your own psychological clarity. You cannot individuate while carrying someone else's shadow. Jung understood that human beings are deeply social creatures, but he also recognized that the family and social group often exert a tyrannical pressure toward conformity. This pressure frequently manifests as emotional manipulation, particularly through the weapons of guilt and obligation. "After everything I've done for you, a good son would never. If you really loved me, you would." These phrases and countless variations constitute what Jung would recognize as an attempt to keep you locked in a role, to prevent your psychological development, to maintain the family system exactly as it is. This form of manipulation is particularly insidious because it masquerades as love and concern. The manipulator genuinely believes they're acting in your best interest or protecting the family. But Jung's psychology reveals the deeper truth. What they're actually protecting is their own anxiety about change, their own fear of what it might mean if you become fully yourself rather than the role they need you to play. The individuation process that Jung described is fundamentally about differentiating yourself from the collective, from the family complex, from all the voices that tell you who you should be. When family members use guilt to keep you in place, they're not loving you. They're loving the version of you that serves their psychological needs. Consider the parent who makes you feel guilty for living your own life, for pursuing your own dreams, for making choices that don't align with their expectations. What they're really saying is, your individuation threatens my psychological stability. Stay small so I can stay comfortable. Jung would tell you that you must resist this with absolute clarity. Your obligation is not to fulfill the neurotic needs of your family system. Your obligation is to your own becoming, to the self that seeks to emerge through you. This is not selfishness. This is psychological and spiritual necessity. When someone attempts to manipulate you through guilt, the appropriate response is not anger or defensiveness. It's a calm, clear statement of your boundaries. I understand you're disappointed, but this is my decision. I hear that you feel hurt, but I'm not responsible for managing your emotions. I love you, and I'm still going to live my life on my own terms. The guilt you feel is real, but it's not a moral compass. It's often just the internalized voice of a family system that needs you to stay in your assigned role. Jung's work teaches us to question these internal voices, to ask whose voice is really speaking when we feel that suffocating guilt. Boundaries are not walls. They're not about keeping people out or being cold and distant. In Jungian terms, boundaries are about maintaining the integrity of your psychological space, the container within which the self can emerge and develop. When people consistently disregard your boundaries, showing up unannounced, demanding your time and energy without consideration, reading your private communications, making decisions about your life without consulting you, they're doing something more than being inconsiderate. They're refusing to recognize you as a separate, autonomous psychological entity. Jung spoke extensively about the dangers of psychic inflation and the dissolution of boundaries between people. In dysfunctional families particularly, there's often what modern psychology calls enmeshment, a blurring of boundaries where family members can't distinguish between their feelings and yours, their needs and yours, their identity and yours. This might look like a mother who believes she has the right to know every detail of your life, because we're so close, or a sibling who feels entitled to your resources, your time, your emotional labor without reciprocation because that's what family does, or a father who makes major life decisions on your behalf because he knows what's best. The Jungian perspective reveals that this boundary violation prevents both parties from individuating properly. The boundary violator remains psychologically immature, unable to function without inappropriate access to your life, and you remain trapped in a state of psychological fusion, unable to discover who you really are separate from the family complex. Setting and maintaining boundaries is not optional for psychological health. It's essential. And here's what Jung would want you to understand. People who truly love you will respect your boundaries. Those who love the role you play, the function you serve, the needs you fulfill will resist your boundaries with everything they have. You must be willing to enforce boundaries even when it feels uncomfortable, even when they cry, even when they rage, even when they threaten to withdraw their love. Because here's the truth. Love that can only exist without boundaries isn't really love. It's dependency, enmeshment, or control. When someone violates your boundary, you address it directly and immediately. I need you to call before coming over. I'm not available to discuss this topic. My finances are not open for discussion. And then, crucially, you enforce consequences when the boundary is violated again. This might mean ending a phone call, leaving a gathering, or reducing contact. Jung understood that the psyche has natural boundaries for a reason. They protect the sacred process of becoming yourself. One of Jung's most profound insights was that the psyche has an inherent drive toward wholeness, toward what he called individuation. You're not meant to stay the same person your entire life. You're meant to grow, transform, integrate, become. But here's what happens in many relationships, especially familial ones. The people around you have an unconscious investment in you remaining exactly as you are. Your growth threatens them. Your transformation raises uncomfortable questions about their own stagnation. Your courage to change illuminates their fear of change. So they undermine you. They do it subtly and overtly. When you start therapy, they mock it. When you leave a soul-crushing job, they call you irresponsible. When you end a destructive relationship, they defend the other person. When you set a boundary, they call you selfish. When you pursue a dream, they list all the reasons it won't work. Jung would recognize this immediately as the conservative force of the collective working against the individual's movement toward self-realization. The family system, like any system, seeks homeostasis. Your transformation disrupts that balance, and the system will push back. This is particularly painful when it comes from people you love and whose approval you crave. But Jung would tell you something crucial. Their resistance to your growth is not about you. It's about their own relationship with change, with the unconscious, with the unlived life within themselves. When you tolerate this undermining, when you shrink yourself to make others comfortable, when you abandon your path because they can't understand it, you commit what Jung might call a betrayal of the self. You ignore the inner voice, the call to become, the demands of your own psyche for expression and realization. The person who truly loves you will support your growth, even when they don't understand it, even when it makes them uncomfortable, even when it changes the relationship. They might have feelings about it, might grieve the old version of you, but they won't actively sabotage your becoming. You must not tolerate active undermining of your growth. When someone mocks your therapy, you don't engage in defense. You simply note that they're not a safe person to share that aspect of your life with. When someone lists all the reasons your dream won't work, you don't argue. You stop discussing your dreams with them. Jung's concept of the individuated person is someone who has learned to trust their inner guidance over the voices of the collective. This doesn't mean arrogance or dismissing all feedback. It means developing a strong enough sense of self that you can distinguish between genuine concern and threatened resistance to your growth. Jung spent considerable time exploring the human tendency toward unconsciousness, our preference for remaining asleep rather than awakening to our own nature and our impact on others. One of the clearest signs of someone operating from deep unconsciousness is their absolute refusal to take responsibility for their actions. This shows up in relationships as constant blame shifting, gaslighting, rewriting history, and an inability to offer genuine apology or repair. I wouldn't have yelled if you hadn't made me angry. That's not what happened. You're remembering it wrong. You're too sensitive. I never said that. From a Jungian perspective, this refusal to take responsibility is a defense against consciousness itself. To acknowledge the harm you've caused requires that you face aspects of yourself that might be uncomfortable, that might conflict with your ego image. It requires integrating shadow material, admitting to human fallibility, tolerating the discomfort of guilt or shame. People who refuse this work remain psychologically stuck. But here's what matters for you. When you maintain a close relationship with someone who refuses all responsibility, you become trapped in a hall of mirrors. You can never achieve clarity about what actually happened, who said what, who did what. Your own perception of reality becomes destabilized. This is particularly dangerous with family members because they were there for your developmental years. They can gaslight you about your own history, your own experiences, your own memories. You were such a happy child. I don't know where you got this idea that things were difficult. I never said that to you. You're making things up. You're remembering it wrong because you want someone to blame for your problems. Jung would recognize this as a form of psychological violence. Your psyche needs to integrate your own experience, your own history, your own story. When someone consistently denies your reality, They're interfering with this crucial process of integration. You cannot tolerate this from anyone, not even family. When someone refuses to acknowledge harm they've caused, refuses to apologize, refuses to take responsibility, you must protect yourself by creating distance. This doesn't necessarily mean cutting them off entirely, but it means recognizing that this person cannot be trusted with your inner world, your vulnerabilities, your truth. The appropriate response to someone who refuses responsibility is not to argue about reality or try to convince them. It's to trust your own experience and stop expecting them to validate it. "I know what I experienced" is sufficient. We remember this differently, and that's okay can be used strategically, not because you actually doubt your memory, but because you refuse to engage in their reality distortion field. Jung's work on the self includes this crucial element. You must become the authority on your own experience. No one else gets to tell you what you felt, what you experienced, what was real for you. Jung's entire body of work points toward one ultimate goal: individuation, the process of becoming a psychologically separate and whole individual. But this process is constantly threatened by people who view you not as a person in your own right, but as an extension of themselves, a means to their ends, a supporting character in their story. This shows up most commonly in parent-child relationships, but it can happen in any dynamic. It's the parent who lives vicariously through their child's achievements, who becomes devastated by choices that reflect poorly on them, who can't tolerate any difference in values or lifestyle. It's the sibling who assumes you'll always be available to support them emotionally or financially because you're family. It's the partner who can't conceive of you having needs or desires that don't align with theirs. In Jungian terms, this is a failure of differentiation. The other person has not completed their own individuation and therefore cannot recognize yours. They experience your separateness as a wound, your independence as abandonment, your differences as betrayal. Consider the mother who says, "How could you do this to me?" when you make a life choice she disagrees with. Notice the language. Your choice becomes something done to her, as if you exist as a function of her happiness rather than as a person with your own life to live. Or the father who feels personally attacked when you choose a career path different from what he envisioned, as if your life is meant to fulfill his unlived dreams. Jung understood that this dynamic is psychologically suffocating for both parties. The person treating you as an extension cannot fully mature into their own individuality because they're using you to complete themselves. And you cannot individuate while being treated as a prosthetic limb rather than a separate organism. The insidious part is that this dynamic is often cloaked in language of love and closeness. "We're so alike. I know you better than you know yourself. I just want what's best for you." But Jung would cut through this sentimentality to the truth. Real love recognizes and honors separateness. Real love doesn't require fusion. When you tolerate being treated as an extension, you collude in preventing both your own and the other person's psychological development. You must refuse this role. You must assert your separateness, even when it causes distress in the other person. This might sound like, "I understand this isn't the choice you would make, but it's my life to live. Your disappointment is valid, but it's not my responsibility to manage. We are different people with different values, and that's okay. My purpose in life is not to fulfill your expectations." The discomfort you feel when asserting your separateness is normal. Jung called it the guilt of separation, the anxiety that comes from individuating from the collective. But this discomfort is a sign you're doing the necessary work, not a sign you're doing something wrong. Jung devoted significant attention to the question of how individuals relate to collective values, social norms, and inherited beliefs. His concept of individuation involves a careful, conscious examination of which collective values you genuinely embrace and which you need to reject in order to be authentic. But this process requires a minimum foundation of respect from the people in your life. When someone chronically disrespects your values, beliefs, and identity, mocking what matters to you, dismissing your convictions, or constantly trying to change fundamental aspects of who you are, they're telling you something clear. They don't accept you as you are. This is different from disagreement or healthy debate. You can have different political views, religious beliefs, or lifestyle preferences from someone and still maintain mutual respect. What we're talking about here is contempt, derision, persistent attempts to undermine or change core aspects of your identity. It might look like the family member who won't stop bringing up your past mistakes as if they define you forever. The parent who refuses to use your correct name or pronouns if you've transitioned. The sibling who mocks your spiritual practices. The partner who constantly criticizes your appearance, your interests, your friends, suggesting you need to fundamentally change who you are. Jung would recognize this as an assault on the self, that central organizing principle of the psyche that represents your deepest truth. When someone consistently disrespects your values and identity, they're essentially saying, "Who you are is not acceptable. You need to be someone else for me to fully accept you." This creates an impossible situation. You cannot individuate while constantly defending your right to exist as you are. You cannot develop a strong sense of self while surrounded by voices that tell you that self is wrong, bad, shameful, or unacceptable. The Jungian path is clear. You must remove yourself from environments of chronic disrespect. This doesn't mean everyone has to agree with you or share your values. It means the people in your closest circle must demonstrate basic respect for who you are, even when they don't understand it, even when it differs from their own path. When someone chronically disrespects you, you address it once, clearly. The way you speak about my beliefs is disrespectful, and I need it to stop. If it continues, you don't keep having the same conversation. You reduce contact. You stop sharing vulnerable parts of yourself. You accept that this person cannot be in your inner circle because they fundamentally don't respect who you are. Jung understood that the self cannot flourish in an environment of constant contempt. You need what he called a temenos, a sacred protected space where the soul can unfold. Some people cannot be allowed into that space. Carl Jung's psychology offers us something revolutionary: permission to honor our own psychological development above the comfort of others, even family members. These 7 behaviors we've discussed aren't minor infractions. They're fundamental violations of the conditions necessary for psychological wholeness. Projection of shadow, emotional manipulation, boundary violations, undermining your growth, refusing responsibility, treating you as an extension, and chronic disrespect. Each of these prevents individuation. Each keeps you trapped in unconsciousness. Each asks you to sacrifice your becoming for someone else's stagnation. The path Jung described is not easy. Individuation never is. It requires courage to set boundaries with people you love. It requires strength to walk away from dynamics that feel familiar even when they're destructive. It requires faith in your own inner guidance when the collective voices, especially family voices, tell you that you're wrong. But here's what Jung knew and what his life's work demonstrated. The alternative to individuation is not peace. It's not harmony. It's psychological death, the slow suffocation of the self, a life lived in service to other people's neuroses rather than an expression of your own deepest truth. You are not here to be the repository for someone else's shadow. You are not here to stay small so others feel comfortable. You are not here to tolerate behavior that prevents your psychological and spiritual development. The people who belong in your life will support your individuation even when it challenges them. They will respect your boundaries even when those boundaries disappoint them. They will celebrate your growth even when it means you're growing beyond them. And those who cannot do these things They may be family by blood, but they cannot be companions on the journey to wholeness. Jung would tell you that you owe them compassion, but you don't owe them access to your psyche. You don't owe them a front row seat to your inner life. You don't owe them participation in your own diminishment. The work of becoming yourself is the most important work you'll ever do. It's why you're here. It's the call of the self, seeking to emerge through the particular constellation of experiences, gifts, and challenges that make up your life. Don't let anyone, not even family, interfere with that sacred work. If this video resonated with you, consider what boundaries you need to set, what behaviors you've been tolerating that, deep down are preventing your growth. The discomfort of setting those boundaries is temporary. The cost of not setting them is your life. Thank you for watching. The journey to individuation continues, one boundary at a time.